Today, we have a head-to-head. We have two little domestic coffee pour-over robot type things vying for your attention, vying for your praise. We have two little machines that do the kind of swirly pour thing that you might do if you were making a pour-over. Well, they do it for you. They use technology to distribute the water in a clever way, in theory. We're going to see if they work. We're going to see if they're any good. On this side, we have the Beem, a little €169 pour-over machine. And on this side, the brand new Melitta EPOS, which is a very strange name that I don't understand. This comes in at €250, but it does have a grinder built into it. We'll come back to that. Now, both of them are trying to do the same thing. They're just trying to do a good job in a pour-over type setup, but they go about that in very different ways. So I'll talk you through how each one brews, and at the end, I'll wrap up, give you my opinion, let you know which one I prefer, which one I might recommend. Let's have a little look. First up, we have the Beem. It is a German company that make a variety of coffee and tea stuff. At €170 is not wildly expensive for an automated pour-over, but it does feel a little bit cheap in terms of the fit, the finish. It's a little bit plasticky. As for how it works, the top here is your water tank, and it's interesting because it'll actually heat the water in this tank, which we'll come back to in a second. It has a little kind of pouring nozzle underneath that does the spinny, and then here, it's actually a weighing scale. So this machine works off brew ratios. Again, it works off the 1:15, 1:14 type thing, not a kind of grams per litre, which remains a frustration of mine in the world. But when you're ready to brew, you would tear off your brewer, so it's at 0 grams, and then you would add some coffee. I should have about 24 grams of coffee here, so when I put that in and put it back, so I got my 24 grams, and this thing works on the ratio, and if I go to the ratio setting, it's 1:15, so you can obviously work out the maths involved there. You can set your brew temperature here, which is 93. I'm going to go... It's, for some reason, running the little swirly thing underneath. I don't quite understand that. But it is now starting to heat the water here. Noisily. So we begin the brewing process with a little bloom. And you can, if you want to, actually take this off and give it a swirl. It doesn't interrupt the programming. It doesn't cause the scale to reset. It doesn't freak out. I'm just going to let it be for this particular brew. Now, it quite often runs the little mechanism that does the water distribution when nothing's coming out of it for reasons I don't really understand. And it does irk me slightly because it's quite noisy. So we're brewing. And if I'm honest, if you're watching this go up, maybe you're thinking what I'm thinking, which is, wow, that's really slow. And the flow rate is really slow on this, and I think that's a little bit of a problem. Oh, that is noisy. So it doesn't always do a superb job, even though the water thing is moving around, of actually getting all the coffee. Looking at the top of this, the kind of crust layer, it's not hugely even. Now, at some point, it'll probably reheat the water in the top if it drops below a certain temperature. That's been a kind of pattern of usage, which is not a bad thing, that it's trying to maintain its temperature as it goes. Click, we're done. And again, it's still doing the annoying loud motor thing, even though it's finished. I don't know why it's doing that. But anyway, it hit its desired weight. It did what we expected it to do. It can do its basic maths. That's good. Wow, it's slow though. And that when this shuts up, I'll tell you why that's a problem. Genuinely no idea why it's still moving. Let's get this little brew out here. If you play the flatbed challenge on Instagram, you wouldn't be submitting this one. This bed is kind of a mess. It's not in great condition, and that was bang on the scales. There's not a lot of choice about where you put the brewer, right? It can't be about where I put it. Did I put it in the wrong place? No. It's pretty clear where you put the brewer. So not a great job at even extraction on this one, but more to the point, that really low, sort of slow flow rate, for me, is an issue. It tends to push you to grind a bit coarser, and for me, it lacks enough agitation to really get lots of that fresh water coming in contact with the ground coffee, because I think you want some turbulence in your brew, you want some churn, and this just brews too slowly. And the end result, it's not bad. It just feels like there's goodness left on the table, right? Like it's not at the potential of the coffee or the setup in a way. The fact that it doesn't always nail the brew in terms of distribution of water is also particularly frustrating. It's not always bad, but it's often bad. Irritating. A couple of other things worth noting. The solution of heating the entire water chamber is quite a simple solution. It's quite an elegant solution in a way. But if you don't put enough water in and you start this brewer and you walk away, it will brew as normal and it won't throw out an error code. It won't complain about anything. It'll just brew and then just run out. Even if there's still a little bit of water left in the bottom of the brewer, it doesn't pull absolutely everything through. And then because I need to put more water than I need precisely for one brew in there, because it's tendency not to use the entire brew chamber, well then I'm wasting energy. I'm gonna heat and not use 100 to 200 mils of water to stay on the safe side. But this solution of having a really accurate dose is good, but it doesn't work that well in practice with this brewer. Now, while I let the coffee cool down a second, I'll just run you through the functions of this thing here. You have to be quick. Actually, when you turn this on, that's the only time you can sort of set the time settings. So if you've missed that and need to reset the time on the clock, you got to turn it off and on again at the mains, which is kind of weird. So you've got the brew mode, which has automatic and manual, and auto will just do 1 to 15 ratio at 93 degrees C, regardless, it doesn't care. In manual, you can program your ratio and you can program your water temperature. The way that it does that though, if you're still in auto and you try and change your temperature, you just can't, which is kind of frustrating. So if you go back to there, switch it to manual, now we've got control over our very beepy, loud brew temperature. And that's now set, and I could go and change my ratio to 1 to 16, because why not? You do have the option to program it to come on in the mornings. That's pretty simple if you want to do that. And that's kind of it. That's the functions, that's the programming. It has a cleaning function where I presume it just heats this up. If you put some descaler in, kind of helps to descale that whole setup, and it would just pump it through. Let's have a quick taste. Yeah, okay. Not the greatest brew. It has that slightly uneven extraction taste where you have a little bit of hollowness and a little bit of harshness at the same time. It's a slightly frustrating brewer from that regard. It's not expensive. It's got some base functionality. It doesn't try and do too much. It's not connected to Bluetooth. It doesn't do the Internet of Things stuff, all of which I heartily approve of. But fundamentally, I don't mind how it heats the water and the issues there as much as it doesn't do a great job at delivering water well, to agitate, to properly extract the cone below it. You could put like a Hario carafe under here if you wanted to, if you weren't a huge fan of the kind of weird metal thing that's a thing. But I don't think that's going to fix the fundamental problems with this thing. I don't think that's really going to suddenly get you to great coffee. It's 170 euros, and that feels both cheap and expensive. And one final point on build, listening to the motor work, it just doesn't sound like a high quality, long-lasting motor in there. It sounds cheap and noisy, and so my expectations for longevity, my expectations for this not having issues aren't high. I'm not saying it's going to fail, I just wouldn't be shocked if it didn't last that long. And now for the Melitta EPOS, and this is clearly a part of a wider launch of a couple of products, the higher end of things, and seemingly their own line of fancy coffees. We're not reviewing those today. We're not reviewing the slightly expensive but very simple pour over they're doing. We're reviewing this, which is sort of a lot design-wise. There's a few different textures, designs, looks, feels going on here. It's a lot. And at the heart of it is, of course, the classic Melitta cone shape. But this is so fancy that your filter papers, they come in a fancy envelope. Look at this. Look at this. And I get my little debossed Melitta papers. Now I'm told these are designed for a faster extraction, which I think is interesting. Now, this all clunks and clicks into place in various ways. And at 250 euros, it's much more expensive than the Beem. But, and this is very important, but, you get a grinder. And that's kind of a surprising choice for me. I guess that they're going for the, I have no coffee stuff and I want the robot and I want it easy and I want a grinder and I just want one thing that I plug in and I go. And I guess that's an audience, but is that an audience interested in automated pour overs? I don't really know. The decision to include the grinder kind of wrecks my head. It made this very expensive, or at least it probably made it expensive. I don't know what this cost them, but it made it bigger, it made it more expensive. Now the grinder works in a kind of shocking way to me. As for grind control, you've got 3 settings really. I'm sure you could try and keep between them, but they're kind of designed to be coarse, medium, and fine. That's pretty weird, but okay. So the way it works is this. Firstly, you decide how much coffee you're going to brew. You've got down here 2, 4, 6, or 8 cups. That's the amount. And each cup is about 125 mils based on the fact that 4 cups is half a litre, so little cups of coffee. And on the water tank on the side, you'll see those same corresponding markings. So you choose 4 cups. Let's make 4 cups. Let's do that. Let's do half a litre. Then you need to choose the strength, right? So you've got a 1, 2, or 3. And what this does is basically adjust the throw. For 4 cups, typically at the 2 setting and the medium, I would get about 24-ish grams. And at the 1 setting, I'd get 22. And at the 3 setting, I might get 26 to 28. It's not super consistent. And that kind of variance tracks all the way through. So if I was brewing 2 cups, I'd have literally half the amount. It works. It's reasonably accurate in terms of it'll deliver you twice as much as 4 as it will do at 2, and twice as much again at 8 if you want that. But this method of controlling it is bizarre to me. You have no real control over how much coffee goes in. And the reliability will be okay on a timed grinder, but not fantastic. And it wants you to fill the little hopper with coffee and just go that way, which I don't recommend doing, because if you need to change coffee, it's quite awkward to get the coffee out. If this is confusing, it's okay. I had my brain broken a little bit too. So let's grind some coffee. So let's push grind. And to be honest, these buttons down the bottom here are not very satisfying to push. So it's in grind mode, and I can set my dose. I'm going to go for a strength of 2 out of 3. And when I'm ready to go, I push go. We have ground coffee. What I will say is, if you're not using the little basket, if you're not grinding into this, if you're trying to grind into something else, know that it has massive static issues. Like chaff gets everywhere, and that's very frustrating. It's not too bad if you're grinding into the little basket thing, but anything else, I would not recommend it. Let's get on brew. We've got some coffee there, and I've got to say, that medium setting is pretty fine. It's finer than I would have anticipated. Now I've got the pre-wet button selected, so it will do a kind of bloom phase. You can turn that off if you want to, but I think we should do the pre-wet, which is a much worse term than bloom, especially when their coffee line is called Bloom. Anyway, let's brew. Let's talk about the little robot, because it started, and now we're into bloom. So we've had a little blooming phase, and that's nice. So the way it works is this. You've got this rotating arm that has 3 different holes in it, and at different phases of the brew, it seems to push water out of different holes, which I'm actually kind of into. I think that's kind of a clever way of distributing water. Not a bad looking bloom. We're the other way now. So it tends to start in the center, so that first hole distributes water. And then later in the brew, as the cone rises, it does a sort of better job of using the other 2 holes to sort of spread the water further out. Now that was obviously a oddly loud brew. There was both a loud motor and then the pock of kind of a steamy brew. That was kind of surprising. That hasn't always happened, but that was not a particularly pleasant sound. Now that was a much faster brew than the Beem. Like, it delivered water much quicker, which I think is broadly a good thing. And, you know, it's not going to win any flatbed challenge, competitions either, but it looks in slightly better shape than the resulting kind of bed of the Beem as well. And one nice little touch here, there's a little stopper actually inside the cone, so that when I pull this out, it doesn't drip, even though there is still liquid in there. And again, I want to like it, but I don't. I think it does a better job brewing than the Beem does. I think it distributes the water well. I think it delivers it at a good speed. You get enough agitation. It is a better brewer than the Beem. But why, oh why did you force me to buy this grinder with it? I really don't understand it. They don't seem to do a separate standalone option. It is with the grinder or not at all. That's your choice. It's the kind of giant Darth Vader with gold accents thing, and I don't love the look. It's quite imposing. It shows dirt really easily. It shows chaff really easily, and having a static problem, that's not great for me. I don't love the little buttons across the bottom. I don't think they're nice to push. You don't get any kind of feedback other than the kind of beep that is a little bit delayed. So you can kind of double push accidentally. It's frustrating. There's no real control here, right? Like there's no setting of brew times. There's no setting of brew temperatures. You're going to put water in and coffee in, but you're not even going to control how much coffee goes in. The grinder is. And it's going to be about 50, 55 grams a litre from the coffees I've used. But hey, if I had a darker roast coffee, my throughput would be higher, right? Like different coffees grind at different speeds depending on how hard, how dense they are. It's a kind of head wrecker to me to have this bizarre grinder with 3 grind settings and no real transparency into how much coffee you're grinding each time. I want to like it more than I do. And those issues, the frustrations, the bundling of the grinder for me is a kind of disqualifying factor. It rules out most people who would watch this channel who maybe have a grinder at home, right? This is now an irrelevant product to you because you're not going to buy another coffee grinder. The people who want a pour-over robot probably have a coffee grinder. I think. Maybe I'm wrong, and tell me if I'm wrong. If you're watching this and you're like, no, this is for me. This is my perfect machine. I do want to hear from you. Now, all ranting aside, how is the coffee? That coffee does taste okay. It tastes okay. It's not bad at all. It's quite nicely extracted. It's still a little bit hot, but it's okay. And in theory, what I should do is I should load this with the same grind from the same grinder as I did the Beem. But that's such an odd test for a machine that comes with a grinder, right? What's the point of assessing this directly against a unit that does something in many ways totally different? So here's the summary. The Beem. It's 170 euros. It feels a little cheap and plasticky. It's simple in its function, but ultimately, I don't think it does a great job in the distribution of water. It doesn't brew fantastically well. The Melitta does a better job brewing. It does. The little sort of spray head thing here is quite nice. I quite like the way it works. I think that's pretty clever. It does a good job. But the decision to take away all the control from how you grind your coffee is maddening to me and confusing. You won't get the best out of every bean that you put in there. You'll be in the ballpark and it'll be extremely consistent brew to brew, but you'll never, I don't think, get the best out of everything except by luck now and again. If they just took out the grinder, if it was half the machine and half the cost, if it was 125 euros and it was just an auto brewer, that would be a maybe. That would be interesting. These were both paid for, thanks to the support I get from Patreon. So many of you help me out, give me a budget to go and buy a machine, so I'm not beholden to manufacturers sending me freebies. I don't feel like I owe them anything, and I can tell you what I think is the truth about them. Give you my unvarnished opinion. I'll be giving them away. I don't get to keep these, but I'm very grateful to Patreon for supporting me and this project. But let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. Do you have one of these already? Do you have similar thoughts to me? Do you disagree with me? I would love to hear what you think. What's your experience so far? Are you loving it? Are you hating it? Are you regretting it? Are you delighted with it? Leave a comment down below. I'll say thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a great day.